Of this again. Okay, good morning, students, and welcome to our class today. You're real gluttons for punishment. I got to hand it to you for coming back for more. So today is Thursday, September the 19th, right? September still? Good. And this is the beginning of our course in economics that we're going to do this fall semester. Now, this is going to be a little bit less intense than the history class, I think. You don't have to write essays and you don't have to write facts. Probably just show up to class and probably I'll give you a quiz every week. But other than that, I don't think it's going to be too tough for you. Now, I see that we got our online students joining us. This is the book that I said was going to be included in this course. It's called, oh, there's the camera over there. Economics in One Lesson. It comes in several different covers. But I highly recommend this book and would like you to acquire it and read it. What this does is it takes the principles of economics and applies them subject by subject to a whole list of economic questions like minimum wage and trade deficit and government spending and unions and on and on and on. There's about 15 or 20 of them. But since most of the students in this class have already been through that course, it's been a couple of years ago. It was in 2017. And it wouldn't hurt you to do it again. But what I'm going to do with you in this class is I'm going to give you a much broader theoretical or philosophical foundation in economics before we dive into the specific details, which we will dive into. And basically what I'm saying is rather than explaining to you all the answers, I'm going to explain to you why all the answers are the way they work. And so you'll be able to figure them out for yourself. So, and here again, it's going to be difficult for me to gauge myself, pace myself as far as how much material we want to get through. We've got 13 weeks in this fall semester from now until Christmas time. And during the course of that time, I'm going to give you a very thorough foundation that you're going to be able to think for yourself about economic questions and issues. Yes, the recording is on. Okay. And it's also recording in the Zoom cloud here today. So hopefully that'll be easily accessible. I will send out the email link so you'll have it and say, click on this to watch the recording and you can review the class. Okay, so here's the beginning of my ideas of, and you don't have to write this in your notes, the beginning of my ideas on how this course is going to shape up for us. For the first 6 weeks, I've got this list of topics, which are organized in kind of a systematic fashion. There are some specific details, but I'm also going to be covering the foundation of the theory as we go through it. And I'll get started with that this morning. Today, I'm doing class number 1, which is an overview of the schools of economic thought. You know, when I talk about it, when you go out the street and talk to strangers about economists, are you all on the same page? No, you're not. And it's because the economics that I'm teaching you in this class is not the economics that you'll learn at BYU or when you go to college. That's going to be almost all the majors. It's required. I mean, there's probably some majors you could get into and not have to do economics. I don't know, PE, art, music. There's a few of them you can get away from it. But as far as your general education requirements, it's going to be in there for almost all the science and math majors. And I'm going to tell you right now, it is going to be painful. It's terrible classes. I mean, everyone who's gone to college has done these things, but you know, when I did it, it was just difficult for me to do it because I knew that this stuff I was reading and learning and trying to answer the correct answers on the tests and the questions was flat out not true. Okay, it's not to say that there's no logical or academic or rational support for it. It's just that the way that they approach it does not coincide with real life in the real world. And what I'm going to teach you here today does. Okay, and that makes all the difference. So I'm going to cover over those 4 schools of economic thought that I'm going to talk a little bit about what is economics and why you should study it. Hopefully that'll encourage you, speed you up. And then the last topic I'm going to cover this morning is entrepreneurship. And then if you look, I'm not going to go read down the rest of the whole list, but it's going to go like that for class number 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And I'm leaving myself open for some major adjustments as I go through it, because I don't think there's any way I'm going to go through 6 weeks with this schedule and be able to stay on it and know that everything fits where it was. And so some things might get cut off and shifted or moved up or moved down. Okay, but that just gives you an impression of the kinds of topics we're going to be talking about. Okay, so you look at that and you say, well, like if I look at inflation and deflation, do you think you know about that already, or the gold standard, the Federal Reserve? Do you say, oh yeah, I understand all that stuff. I don't need to have a lesson on that. Or do you say to yourself, I have no idea. Okay, well, we're going to take you from that I have no idea to the, oh yeah, I understand that. That makes sense. I know how that's supposed to be. Okay? And you'll, as you'll see, it is important. Okay, so here's where I'm going to start. Let's see, overview of economic thoughts. I guess I'm not starting with that. I'm going to start with why study economics first. Okay, and you can take notes on this if you want. You don't have to if you don't want to. If I say anything that's interesting to you, write that down. Consider Manhattan. Here we have a city of, during the daytime, about 4 million people. And they are all crammed in, as I say, 4 million people in the daytime and about only 1.5 million people in the nighttime. And where do they all disappear to? They come to the city to work, and then in the nighttime, they take the trains and the buses and the cars and the subways, and they get out of town. Okay, but overnight, there's about 1.6 million people that stay there. Do you see any gardens or farm fields in Manhattan? Do all of them have to bring their lunch with them and then go out of town to get something to eat if they ever want to eat? The answer is no. There is all kinds of food. As a matter of fact, Manhattan is a home to some of the most famous restaurants in the world. And they have every kind of imaginable food that you can think of. You got fresh seafood, and they've got Kobe beef from Japan, and they've got, you name it, whatever you can think of. They probably have their restaurants that use specialty salt. It's not just normal table salt. Now, my wife is very finicky about salt. If I go buy a container of salt and put it out there on the table, she'll say, no, I want the other one. That's got all the minerals in it, you know. Well, salt is salt, right? Well, apparently not. There's such a thing as gourmet salt, and it is sold for very expensive prices in these fancy restaurants in Manhattan and other places around the world. And they make it up there in Puget Sound or in Washington State. Okay, so how does gourmet salt get from Washington State over into Manhattan? The 23 square miles, if you want to imagine that, in Burley, go from Main Street in Burley out to Declo and down to 400 South, roughly. Okay, now try putting 4 million people in that little piece of ground. Okay, so you say that's why all the time. How do they get around it? They must be bumping into each other all the time, right? Well, yeah, probably to a certain extent that they are. But this is a place that is so attractive to live that a little 2-bedroom apartment or little 1-bedroom apartment, a little studio apartment at 650 square feet is going to cost you $2,000, $3,000 a month. And if you want to get a fancy apartment or a condominium in one of those high-rise buildings, you're talking multiple millions of dollars to move into a place like that. Remember a guy by the name of Donald Trump? You know, a real estate mogul, and he's got something in there called, in Manhattan, called Trump Tower. It's gold and it's high and it's like a hotel or something. And to say, okay, how is it possible that the needs of 4 million human beings can be satisfied day in and day out with all the exact amount of necessary milk and gasoline and transportation and clothing and Band-Aids and whatever else the heck they happen to need? How is it possible that all those people can have exactly what they need in such a situation as that? Okay, and I would say to you, that is the miracle of economies, of free market economies. You could say the same thing about Burley, Idaho. How does Smith's know how many packages of Cheerios should be on the shelf in Burley, Idaho? How did they know that? Or how many pounds of hamburger? You know, if you get too many pounds of hamburger after 3 or 4 days, this stuff starts stinking and nobody's going to buy it. Do you think they have figured out how to have exactly the right amount of hamburger in the meat case there, so when people go shopping, it doesn't get wasted and thrown away? Okay, and you got to say to yourself, that's interesting. You know, I should know how that works. Okay, and that's one of the things that that's what economics, there you go, is all about. Okay, it's like, how do we provide the needs of people all around the world? Reason number 2, you are part of the economy. What is an economy? An economy is 7+ billion people that live on this earth, and every one of them have needs and desires and wants. Every one of them is looking for breakfast every day. Every one of them is looking for a place to sleep every night. Every one of them is looking for a way to get around. How is it possible that all those people can get along with each other and every one of them get what they want, what they need? Okay, well, some of them don't. Some of them, there's great differences in the things that some of them get and some of them don't get. How do you account for that? And what can we do as human beings to help that situation? Can we understand why there's some of them that are bare subsistence? I heard somebody saying once, as a matter of fact, it was just a little while ago, because we had a holiday called Labor Day. It's at the beginning of September, right? And what's the Labor Day all about? We got to celebrate the worker. We got to celebrate the fact that the workers of our economy, of our country, support our economy and give us all the stuff we need, right? And I saw emails and the internet stuff saying it's the unions that gave us Labor Day, because before we had the unions, we had people working 14-hour-a-day shifts in the middle of the night. We had kids working in mines and not being able to go to school, and people starving to death. And all we had to do is pass some progressive laws, and the government could solve this problem. And now we got 2 days a week off. We don't have to go to work at all. Isn't that great? And so I'm saying to myself, okay, well, if that's the case, all we have to do is pass some laws and get some unions. Why doesn't Bangladesh pass some laws and get some unions? Or why doesn't all of these immigrants down in Mexico and Central America that are flooding the borders trying to come into the United States, why don't their countries pass some laws and make some unions and give everybody a 5-day, 40-hour work week? Why don't they do that if that's all you have to do? And if you were an economist, you would have to say, well, because unions and governments passing laws is not the reason that we have a 40-hour work week. It doesn't have anything to do with it. They like to stand up and take credit for that, but it has to happen because of other reasons. And the other reasons is something called capital accumulation and productivity. Okay? And so we have to learn about that. And you're gonna be part of this economy for the rest of your life, so you might as well understand what makes it tick. Okay, here number 3. A lot of people think studying economics is a good way to get rich. You know, I'm going to become a Wall Street trader, or I'm going to become some kind of investor. And yeah, there's money involved in economics, but the principles that I'm teaching you about economics don't only apply to money investments, and don't maybe even necessarily only apply to money and investments. I mean, you could say that economics is the study of exchanges, and all of you, all the time, every day, all day long, are making exchanges. I'll give you the first example. Why did you get out of bed this morning? Because you made a determination that getting out of bed would be better for you than staying in bed. Now, that's your individual choice, your individual circumstances, your individual decision. I know sometimes you decide staying in bed will be better than getting up. Okay, but that's what we call human action. Everybody's always making changes, always making trade-offs, always making decisions, and they do that with respect to money, and they do it with respect to everything else. And we're going to understand what goes into making those decisions and why it's important. The business of investments in money is a big part of the economy. It's important for you to understand it. But beyond that, it's like all of us are sailing in the ocean in this huge ship called the United States economy, the USS economy. If that ship starts leaking, or if it's being steered into a hurricane, do you think it would be a good idea for you to find out where the lifeboats are? Would you think it would be a good idea to find out if there's a way to get off that ship and get into a different one? It's because you as an individual can't control what's going to happen in this entire United States economy. And if it's going to crash, can you do something to protect yourself from that crash and prepare yourself for that? And the answer is yes. For example, yesterday, the Federal Reserve announced that they were going to reduce the federal funds rate by 1/4 percentage point, which is called 25 basis points. Why did they do that? And what difference does it make that they did that? Do you think that it would be a good idea for you as an educated high school student to understand why they did that and what effect that is going to have? Earlier this week, the Federal Reserve also did something that they haven't done at all ever since about 2008, when we had the last financial crisis. Remember 2007? How many of you were alive in 2007? You remember what happened to the real estate market? Do you remember what happened to the investments, the retirement accounts and stock portfolios of common ordinary people that we know? There's a guy in our ward, lived down the street. I remember talking to him about that, and he's like, my retirement account got cut in half. Here I was, I'm only a few years away from retirement, and my entire retirement account got cut in half, which means I no longer can afford to retire. I'm going to have to keep working for the rest of my life. Do you think that he would like to have been able to see far enough ahead what the federal government doing, what the Federal Reserve is doing, that could have made that foreseeable and avoidable? Probably. Back in that financial crisis of 2007 to 2009, we saw tremendous impact on the value of investments, on unemployment rates, debt levels. And guess what? There's another one coming. Yes, okay? So let's think about what we can do to recognize it, understand it, analyze it, take it apart, figure it out, and learn how to prepare for it and avoid it. Now, this is reason number 4.
What did the Federal Reserve do?
Oh, didn't I tell you? The Federal Reserve interfered or jumped into the overnight, the short-term funding market, what's called the repo market, to inject liquidity into the system. If you remember back to the financial crisis of 2007, they said that the reason it happened was a liquidity crisis, which meant that people didn't have money. Now, it turns out that corporations and businesses and governments banks are constantly, every night, they are going into the short-term market and borrowing billions of dollars. And it's been like at the federal funds rate, 1.2, 1.3, 1.5, 2.2% interest rate, and they pay it back the next day. It's very short term. But earlier this week, a few days ago, the interest rate on those overnight funds went up, it spiked up to about 8 or 9%, which when we're used to having 1.5 or 2% is a huge anomaly. And basically it's because there was a, what one author wrote is a slow motion credit crunch. Okay, they're saying, oh, it's not a big deal. The Federal Reserve handled it. They know what they're doing. And relax, it's going to be okay. But it required a massive intervention by the Federal Reserve to make that, to iron that out. Okay, and the question you have to say to yourself is, do I trust them that they do know what they're doing? Let me ask you this question. Why do we need a Federal Reserve anyway to tell us what the interest rate on money should be?
It's a business. And it's privately owned, yes.
Okay. That is a prime example of a violation of principles of free markets. The Federal Reserve is, okay, and as a result of that, you're going to have what we call dislocations. We're going to have errors in the management of the economy because it is not being responsive to the demands of the consumers, the people, the savers, the investors. Okay, you're going to come to understand that better. This number 4 reason is what I consider to be probably the most important reason for why you should study and understand economics. Have any of you watched the Democratic presidential candidates debates? Okay, it's still very early in the election cycle. We have a presidential election next year. Oh, thank you. Sorry. We'll see if that helps. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that
So it's very early in the election cycle. The election is going to happen November of next year. It's even more than a year away from now. Who's the Republicans going to nominate to be the candidate for president of the United States next year? Okay, Donald Trump. That's a given. The incumbent always gets the nomination to be reelected, you know, and especially if there's anybody thinks he's been doing a good job. And there are people that do think that. There are also a lot of people think that he's an absolute buffoon. He knows nothing, and we just got to get rid of him. The sooner the better. Okay, the Democrats, on the other hand, they don't know who they're going to put up against Donald Trump, and so they're all fighting it out right now, clear, a year beforehand. And we got Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren, and we've got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman from New York, and there's about 20 or 30 of them. I mean, there's so many of them that they can't put them all on the stage at the same time. They have to have 2 nights of the dates with 10 guys the first night and 10 guys and gals the second night. Well, it's very interesting if you were a Democrat, or even if you're not a Democrat, it's kind of interesting to listen to them because they stand up there and saying, here's what I'm going to do. Have you heard of Bernie Sanders?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, he's not even a Democrat. He's an independent because he doesn't believe the Democrats are socialist enough for him. And so he votes with the Democrats, but he calls himself a socialist. And we need to have socialism come back to America. Okay, this is a huge, huge issue. And it turns out that there's a very strong element of American public opinion that is saying, it's time for socialism in America. Why? Haven't they learned any history at all? Can't they see what's going on in Venezuela right now as we speak when they try to implement socialism and people are leaving the country by droves because they're starving to death? They don't even have any toilet paper. Could you imagine living in a country with no toilet paper?
Is Bernie the one that they compare to Karl Marx and just like right down the line? Probably yes. Okay, and because he advocates what we classify as Marxism. Okay, the socialism is part of is a Marxist philosophy. Yes, that's a big piece of it. That's what he talked about right here, right?
and yes, we're gonna be touching on that. So I'm gonna give you some of the historical evidence, some of the example. Oh, I have it in my drawer. Well, I won't show you that today then. But socialism has been documented responsible for the greatest level of human suffering in the history of the planet. Okay, and they come to power one of two ways: either by a violent revolution, where they say this is how we're doing it from now on, or the people vote in it. And what is at the core of that? I was going to mention Venezuela. I mentioned. Do you remember Zimbabwe? They said we're going to have socialism now. How about North Korea? How about the former Soviet Union? Did you see any of those countries that the people were prosperous and only working 40 hours a week and taking vacations and having adequate health care and diet and transportation? And the answer is no. They are suffering, and this is why it's morally important, is because people die. They don't get health care, they don't get food, they're starving of malnutrition. And yes, millions upon millions of people die under these systems of government. You want to say go?
I do. I guess we just came from Denmark and Sweden. They're socialist countries, but they're not dying, and they look very happy. So that is what is seen.
Okay.
This other stuff is what is not seen.
And I will deal with that argument. They always say when talking about socialism, what about Norway? What about Denmark? And maybe one quick good answer is, what about Venezuela?
Right.
And when Bernie Sanders got asked that question, he refused to respond to it. He just ignores it as if it didn't exist. Okay, but this is a bedrock issue that you are going to be facing. Are any of you going to be turning 18 by next year? Okay, you're going to be asked to go and vote for a president. Do you think you'll be able to make a wise choice? Okay, so there's 4 good reasons to study economics, and I can probably think of some more, but I'll leave that up to you for now. Okay, there's 4 schools of economic thought that exist in the world today that all economics can be classed into one of these 4 categories. And the first one we call the Marxist school. Now, obviously, that's named after Karl Marx, but he also had a buddy by the name of Friedrich Engels that helped him develop his theories and writings. And this happened in the late 1800s. Okay, I talked to you in history class yesterday about that period of time, which in America was a blossoming explosion of development and technology and prosperity, right? The same time, over there in Europe, we had these characters coming up with a brand new idea on how to make everybody happy, wealthy, and prosperous. And there were completely different ideas. As it says here on the slides, that Marxist theory is that human society develops naturally and unavoidably. It's like a train coming down the tracks, and you can't stop. All societies start out as some kind of a slave system where we have rich, wealthy people that are exploiting and taking apart or taking advantage of the slave class. And then that progresses to feudalism, and feudalism, well, it's kind of a one step above slavery, where now the people are tenant farmers, and they have to work and give their fruits of their labor to support the royalty and the knights and the lords. But it's a step above because now they're tenants, and supposedly they're renting their land. And then it goes to capitalism. He says capitalism is only one step above feudalism, and capitalism is the idea of private ownership of capital, what we call assets, land, money, equipment, and so forth. And then from capitalism, we will naturally progress to socialism, and then the ultimate goal is to get from socialism to communism. Okay, this is Karl Marx, and basically, the whole point of this class is to compare and contrast what we are calling free market economics with the Marxist school. Okay, so these are the two highlights that are constantly going to be explained in this class. This is what we say, and this is what they say. And which do you think is right? Okay. Number two, we got this fellow by the name of John Maynard Keynes. Very, very influential economist, and he published his landmark work in 1936, and basically depends on the concept of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. In other words, he says, let's not get bogged down with the nitty gritty of, how many pencils you need to buy today. Let's just take all the things that everybody wants to buy in aggregate is called total demand. That's how much stuff people want. And then on the other hand, we've got all the stuff that everybody is willing to produce, and that's total supply. And so we can thank John Maynard Keynes for introducing the subject that is now called today macroeconomics. When you go to college, you're going to have two courses. They're going to have a course in macroeconomics, and then you're going to have to take a course in microeconomics if you do anything that has to do with the economy. And his main solution to all the economic problems of the world is the government can make up for it. Now, if you were a government official like a president of the United States, and here you got this smart guy that came up with an economic theory that said the government can be in charge of the economy and can solve all the problems, what would you say to him? No, you would say, well, good job, that's great, let me pay you some money. And let me have you teach your philosophies in all the colleges and all the schools around the country so that all the economists are trained in your methodology, which basically looks to the government to be the solution to all the problems. And this, why it's called mainstream economics, this is how your world works today. It's by Keynesian economics. If somebody has an economic problem, like they're too poor or the rent is too high or gasoline is too high, what do they try to do to solve it? Go to the government. We want you to make a law. We want you to make it so we only have to work 5 days a week. Pass me a law. Okay? According to Austrian economics, there is really no such thing as macro or microeconomics. Everything is determined by human action. According to Keynesianism, the government has to step in when we have market failures. And we'll talk about market failure and what is a market failure and is there really such a thing as market failures? And that's the big reason. If you look at people that are clamoring for socialism, they're saying capitalism doesn't work. Here we have all these problems. Look at in California, we got so much homelessness. Donald Trump came out and said, there's so much homelessness in California, it's going to ruin the state. And so they're saying, okay, that's a market failure because the real estate is too expensive in California and these people can't afford it, so they're out living on the street. And there's tons of other examples. For example, Bernie Sanders is saying, we got to have free college education. We have free public schools up through high school. We need to also have free college because there's people that are not able to go to college, and this is a market failure because everybody is not getting everything that they need and want from the free market economy. Therefore, there's a failure. Okay, and we are going to talk about that and probably come up with an idea that says, well, it's not a failure of the market. It's because of government intervention. It's exactly because of government intervention. In other words, we don't have a free market. And that's the reason that the economy is failing. Okay, so we'll have to look into that and understand that. Opposed to the idea of gold-backed money, and you know that after World War II, this is 1936. What year did World War II end? 1945. And at the end of 1945, there was created what was called the Bretton Woods Agreement, which established the monetary system that put the United States dollar as the world's reserve currency. And at that time, it was a gold-backed dollar up until 1971, when Richard Nixon said, ain't no more gold coming back for these dollars because we ran out. Okay? So understanding what gold is and how what is it money and can it be used, what does it function in the economy? And that's just all I'm going to say about that right now, about gold. We will come back to the subject of gold. So there's the name of his book, The General Theory of Employment, Money, and Interest. Okay, and the key word in the title of that book is general. Okay, the general theory. And it was very interesting that he included a little explanation at the end of that book that said, now I realize that everything that I've explained in this book will be much more simple to implement in a command and control or a socialist economy than in a free market economy. But nevertheless, I still think they're good ideas. In other words, he recognized this idea of socialism and how it would fit in with what he was teaching. So he was a very smart guy, a genius, as a matter of fact, and became independently wealthy by investing in the stock market and commodities and so forth. But when the crash of 1929 came, which we're going to have a whole key date on in the history class to explain about the Great Depression, he had no clue that that was coming, and he lost everything in that crash. Now, if this was the smartest economist in the world that was responsible for giving us an entire theoretical structure for supporting government intervention in the economy, which he did, and which Theodore Roosevelt was very happy about, because Theodore Roosevelt came along with massive government interventions during and before World War II, which led to, I mean, he was trying to solve the Great Depression, right? That happened in 1929. And what did he wind up doing? Well, he wound up prolonging it longer than the longest depression we've ever had before. Were there never any economic crashes before then? Yes, there were. Do you remember the Great Depression of, well, you remember the banking crisis in 1836? You remember one in like 1898, and there was one in 1921, 1922. But you never hear about them or remember them because they got over so quickly. And the reason they got over so quickly is because the government didn't intervene and just let the people take their lumps. They took their losses and they reallocated their resources properly. But again, all those also can be looked back to the causes of them being government interventions. Okay. Okay, I guess that's enough for John Maynard Keynes. That's the second of the four schools of economic thought. The third one is attributable to Milton Friedman. I think Milton Friedman is still alive today. Very, very smart guy, incredibly smart guy, and funny. I you will like a lot of what he has to say. Basically, the monetarist, and this is also called, if you want to put it in notes, the Chicago School, because Milton Friedman worked at or did his work at the University of Chicago. The Chicago School is a monetarist school. Basically said, we agree with the macro approach to economics, but rather than dealing just with aggregate supply and demand to determine the success of the economy, what is really happening is it goes back to the money supply. And that is why when I studied the money supply, he went back and studied all of the increases and decreases of economic prosperity through the history of the world, and he was able to show that every time there was an economic problem or a crash, it had to do with, there was correlated to the supply of money that the government had been making. Okay, and that's why he's called the monetary. He said inflation is always and everywhere, and a monetary phenomenon. It has to do with money. Okay, and so we would agree with him on that. He also allowed for the importance of individual actors, whereas Keynes is talking about aggregate groups. He does not even consider that individual people will have different reasons for getting out of bed in the morning. You know, he just figures, okay, here's how it all goes. And Friedman said yes, but every individual is a separate actor. Okay, Milton Friedman's got a lot of videos on YouTube. If you don't have something to do sometime, and you're looking for a little break from writing your history facts, just go ahead over to YouTube and put in a search Milton Friedman, and you'll see some interesting. I remember one of the most famous, he was taking a tour, he was being given a tour. He went over to make a trip to India to give some lectures or something. He got picked up at the airport by one of these government officials that was going to drive him downtown where he was going to be staying. And as they were driving away from the airport, they were going down this construction zone in the highway. And there were hundreds of workers out on the highway with shovels and picks and axes and rakes. And the government official said to him, "Can you see what a great job we're doing of providing employment for all of these people? I mean, look at our great economy. We've got jobs for hundreds and hundreds of highway workers that are building these roads." And Milton Friedman looked out the window, and he said, "Why don't you give them spoons?" Do you get it? Do you get it? Yeah. If your goal is to hire people and make them have a job, you could have 10 times as many people if all they had was a spoon to dig with instead of a shovel. Okay. And the point is, that is not how you increase prosperity, by giving people busy work. Like dig up a pile here and move it over there, and then tomorrow dig up the pile and go put it back in the hole. That doesn't increase prosperity. It doesn't accomplish anything. Okay, so that's Milton Friedman. Now here's the last one, the Austrian School of Economics. These are the guys that we want you to remember and be familiar with. The first one is who we call the founder of the Austrian School of Economics, a guy by the name of Karl Menger. And he was writing and working in the late 1800s, 1870, 80, 90, around there. The second guy is probably who we call the dean of the Austrian school, the most famous and most important. You don't have to get everything down right here. I'm going to go through an individual slide on each of these fellows directly. Is Ludwig von Mises. Ludwig von Mises is the author of Human Action. Okay, and he provided the deductive logical framework for the entire Austrian School of Economics. And the reason I like it is that it's irrefutable. There's some people that say, well, that doesn't work. Well, if you say that doesn't work, it's like, maybe I'll explain this to you. His whole logical framework is based on deductive reasoning. Have any of you studied enough geometry to understand the Pythagorean theorem? If you have a 90-degree triangle, the square of the short side plus the square of the other short side is going to be equal to the square of the long side. Okay, have you seen how that theorem can be logically proven? Okay, in geometry, you have what are called theorems and proofs. And you go through and you can demonstrate that no matter what, that is true. It has to be true. Okay, you could say a simpler analogy is I've got a list of 10 numbers. I'm going to add them from the top of the list down to the bottom of the list, and I'm going to get a certain answer. And then I'm going to take the list and I'm going to turn it upside down, or I'm going to add from the bottom to the top. Is it possible that I'm going to get a different answer? Okay, if you get a different answer when you add the numbers from the bottom to the top than you did from the top to the bottom, I would say you made a mistake. It can't be. The same numbers have got to add up to the same result no matter how you add them. Okay, that's called deductive logic. Okay, and so that's the approach he took with economics. He's got these axioms, these original premises, and then he deduces logically these economic principles. And if somebody comes along and says, well, I took my protractor and I took my ruler and I drew a 90-degree triangle and I measured the square this side and I measured that side and I measured that side, and it didn't come out exactly to the square of the hypotenuse equaling the sum of the squares of the sides. And someone would say, sorry, you made a mistake. You didn't draw it right. You didn't have an accurate enough rule or something. You had a problem. It didn't work because you made a mistake. Okay, and that's the framework of economics that he has given us that we can work with and say, these are the rules. And if you get some other result, it's because you didn't do it right. Okay, and then finally a more recent, well, I say more recent. He was 1899, actually almost the same time as the Mises is Friedrich Hayek, who's also made some significant contributions to this school of economics. And actually, Friedrich Hayek is famous because he was given a Nobel Prize, the last free market economist to ever receive a Nobel Prize in economics. Okay, he died in 1992. Okay, so just briefly, how am I doing on time? I got about 10 more minutes. This is Carl Menger. What did he figure out that, and by the way, the reason this is called the Austrian School of Economics is because Menger and Mises were both from Austria. They were Austrians. Okay, a lot of people would say, well, I'm learning Austrian economics. So like, well, what kind of economics do they have over there that's different from what we have over here? Doesn't have anything to do with where the economics is located. It's where these guys were from. Okay, so Carl Menger, he published his book called The Principles of Economics, which is a good book, 1871. I've got that on my desk over there someplace. And here's some of the ideas that he supported. And by the way, if you take a class on the history of economic thought, you will come to understand that these were not the first guys who discovered these principles. It turns out that they were all fully well known back in the 15th century by Spanish economists. But between then and the 19th and the 20th century, they were lost. They fell into disrepute, and the ideas didn't survive. Anyway, he came up with the theory of marginal utility, which, in a nutshell, just quickly, we will have a class section on theories of value. And the theory of marginal utility is tied together very closely with the subjective theory of value, as opposed to the cost or the labor theory of value. The theory of marginal utility says that each additional unit of a good is less valuable to you than the previous one. Okay, if you're really, really hungry and you'd love to have a piece of pizza, would you be willing to pay $4 for it? Oh, I say $4. We went to a restaurant in San Francisco, and had a New York pizza restaurant, Italian pizza. We went in there and they charged $4 for a slice of pizza. So yeah, we bought it and we ate it. Okay.
Wow, big.
It was good. It was big. It was huge.
Oh,
Yeah, it was a big slice of pizza. Kind of like what you get at Costco. Except Costco doesn't charge $4, do they? For a slice of pizza? $2.50, $3. Okay, so you're willing to pay $2.50 or $3 for a slice of pizza. Okay, you eat that and you say, man, that was good. That was really good. I'm really happy with that. Will you be willing to pay the same price for another one? For yourself? And you say, man, I don't know if I'm quite that hungry. I don't know if I can eat a whole nother one. But you go ahead and you go buy another one. And you eat that. Now you're feeling full. Are you willing to pay the same price for a third one?
No.
A fourth one? Okay. How about if you keep having to eat more and more slices of pizza? Do you finally get to the point that it says, I'm willing to pay you to take this pizza so I don't have to eat it? Okay. And the same thing is true with all goods and services, even money. Okay. If for every dollar that you earn, the next dollar is less valuable to the one you just finished earning. Okay. And finally, you get to the point where you say, nah, I don't want to work and earn another dollar. I'd rather go home and go to bed. Okay, that's the marginal theory of utility. Okay, that was his contribution, a great thing. And the subjective theory of value says that all value is subjective. Everything, you hear people talk about the intrinsic value of gold or the intrinsic value of food. But the point is, nothing has intrinsic value. Everything is subjective based on the individual and the circumstances at the time. Okay, how much would you be willing to pay for a glass of water right now? $10? $50? Okay, if you were out in the middle of the Sahara Desert after a week and you were dying of thirst, would you be willing to pay $50 for a glass of water? Absolutely. I can't buy enough of them. Here's $100. Give me two. Right? Okay, it's all subjective. It depends on the circumstances. And everybody has different wants and needs and desires and circumstances. So nobody can tell you how much something should be worth to you. Every individual is the only one who can decide for themselves what something is worth. Okay, that's the subjective theory of value. Ludwig von Mises gave us, born in Austria-Hungary in 1881. This is before World War I, where Austria wasn't Austria. It was the Habsburg Empire in Austria-Hungary. By age 12, he spoke these languages: Yiddish, German, Polish, French, and Latin, and understood Ukrainian. By age 12? I'm telling you, this had to be homeschooled kid. In 1934 to 40, this is during the period just up to beginning of World War II, was a professor at the Graduate Institute of International Studies in Geneva, Switzerland. And in 1940, just in the nick of time, he got out of Europe and came to New York City. Okay? And then we have to add one more language to his list, English. He had to learn English. And by this time, his theories of economics were well developed. And because of what was happening with Keynesianism in the United States, he was very, very unpopular, because basically he was the lone voice crying in the wilderness saying, you people are all wrong. You are deluded to believe that this Keynesianism is what causes an economy to crash or to prosper. And he said, this is what really works. Of course, nobody wanted to hear it. So he came to New York City, and because there were some, well, I have some more stuff to tell you about him. I'm not going to ask you what year he immigrated to New York City on the quiz. Okay, just so you know, it was just right before World War II. That's the time frame that's important to place him in. There were some. There was a wealthy individual or individuals who supported the work that he was doing and recognized the truth of it, and they were influential in getting him a position at the university and providing stipend to support him so that he could continue to do his work. So what was it that he gave us? This is a very important one: the impossibility of economic calculation by government, and hence the inevitable failure of all planned economies. Socialism. And I talk about when the government is in the electric business, or in the garbage collection business, or in the education business, what he says, it's impossible for them to respond to the needs of customers because their business is being dictated to them by the law, by the government. And as a result, you have distortions in the economy. And that's what mainstream economists call the mixed economy, where we have some government intervention and some free market. But he says all governments, all socialism, all government planned economies are doomed to failure because of that idea of the lack of economic calculation. In other words, they don't have a price system, and they can't determine what things are really worth and what customers really want, and they can't respond to it. If you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and want to get a driver's license, do they have people that are there that say, step right up over here, we're ready to take your business right now? No, you stand in line and you wait. Okay, but if you go to Walmart and there's a lot of people lined up in the checkout stand, what does Walmart do? Open up another check stand. We don't want these people waiting. We don't want to get them angry at us. Quick, come over here. We'll get you checked out over here. Smith's does that, but Walmart doesn't. Okay, well, the market responds to the needs and the desires of the consumer, and government operated operations cannot and do not. And he talked about the impossibility of centralized knowledge. You know, the whole idea was planning. We got to have central planning. We got to have people, smart people with computers and a lot of data, figure out how many pounds, how many bushels of wheat we need to grow, or how many potatoes we need to grow. And he said, that's impossible. Nobody can be smart enough to get enough information and process it in such a way that they can make the decisions about what should be produced and what should not be produced and what should be consumed. He says, that is impossible. And that's a hard pill to swallow for the central planners. They always want to say, yeah, we are smart enough. And there's a name for that. The name for, there you go, hubris. Write that in your notes if you don't know it, Hubris, the hubris of economic planning. He says the consumer is sovereign. The consumer, we don't have to have an election to elect a smart leader to run the economy. because the consumer votes with the dollars in their pockets every day. And the choices that you make on how to spend your dollars is exactly the same thing as an election. And the people that win the dollars are the ones who stay in business and do more of what they've been doing. And the people that don't get any dollars are the ones that go broke and go out of business and quit doing what they've been doing. And that's exactly what we want to have happen. Whereas the government will say, oh no, we can't have the business, the enterprise fail. We're going to have to support that. We want that business to keep doing what it's doing. Okay, and again, about inflation, the idea of it being a monetary phenomenon, that it has to do with money. And we will talk about inflation, what it is really. There's a big confusion when people throw that term around. As a matter of fact, the Federal Reserve is talking about inflation yesterday. We don't see any inflation, so we need to raise it to lower interest rates. Okay, what they're talking about is price inflation. There's such a thing as price inflation, and there's also monetary inflation. And they usually go together, but they're not in lockstep with each other. Okay, so that's what they're looking at. Okay, and the last guy, Friedrich Hayek, what did he say? What did he do? His book was called The Road to Serfdom, published in 1944, right at the end of World War II. And basically, he was saying, if you want a prescription for turning your country into a miserable failure where people are starving and homeless and having disasters, then go to socialism. So he was given his Nobel Prize in 1974. And what did he teach us that was worthwhile? The importance of the price system to share and synchronize knowledge. Now this kind of builds on what Mises said, is that it's impossible to have any central database of knowledge. He said the price system is a system of information, and the price system is what will telegraph information to all producers and all consumers, all 7 billion of them throughout the world. All I need to know is how much something costs in order to make proper and appropriate decisions about what should be made and who should make it and how much they should make. That's all they have to have is the price. The price tells them everything they need to know. And he also explained in great detail how central planning will lead to totalitarianism, which is what communism is, which is what Karl Marx is saying is my whole goal. That's what I'm trying to get to, is communism. Okay, and he's saying that's totalitarianism. So he was big on the idea of individual liberty and the importance of maintaining individual liberty. Okay, I got one more slide for you, and I have 1 minute left to tell it to you. Okay, can you handle 1 more minute, Carson? Okay, stay with me. This is the last slide. The entrepreneur. The entrepreneur is a guy. I'll read you this excerpt from a text by Mr. Robert Murphy. Entrepreneurship can be defined as acting on perceived opportunities in the market in an attempt to gain profits. Now, Marxists will tell you profits are evil. Profits are abusive. You're taking advantage of somebody if you're making a profit. You shouldn't be charging so much stuff that you're making a profit.
They have a brain. They can make their own decisions.
And so what we're saying is we're saying is that our entrepreneurs are driven by profit. They want to make money, and that's a great thing. This acting as an entrepreneur involves being alert to profit possibilities, arranging financing, managing resources, and seeing a project through to completion. Entrepreneurs can be regarded as heroic characters in the economy, as they are the ones who bear the risks involved in bringing new goods and services to the consumer. Here's what Ludwig von Mises said about entrepreneurs. He said, they are the leaders on the way to material progress. The entrepreneurs are the ones who are giving us a 40-hour work week and a two-day weekend. It's not the government, it's the entrepreneurs. They are the first to understand that there's a discrepancy between what is done and what could be done. They guess what the consumers would like to have and are intent on providing them with the things that they can see consumers want and need. Entrepreneurship is an art every bit as much as creating a painting or a sculpture. In each case, either running a business or producing a work of art, the same elements are involved. First of all, you have to conceive in your mind the undertaking. You have to collect resources and combine them in a different and new way, and risking those valuable resources. If you want to make a new business, you've got to get some stuff. You've got to go buy some stuff or make a commitment, a financial commitment, to use that stuff to make something that's more valuable than what it cost you to make it. Okay, that's what an entrepreneur is coming up with. And he's thereby taking the risk that what he makes with his new stuff could be less valuable than what it was to begin with. Here, I bought all of these things, I put them together into my new business to create this product or service, and guess what? I found out people really don't want to buy it. And now, instead of adding to prosperity, I have subtracted from the prosperity of the world, because I took these valuable things and I wasted them. I used them for things that are now less valuable. I'm not contributing to prosperity, I'm detracting from it. We need to punish those people as quickly as possible and make them stop doing that. Because we want people who will take the resources that we have in the world and make them more valuable. More valuable means that more people want them, more people need them, more people benefit from using them. So it's very common in regular economics textbooks to ignore the entrepreneur when they discuss markets and competition. Their treatment implies that this alertness to profit possibilities, the arranging of financing and management of resources, and seeing a project through to completion are all automatic, and they happen by themselves in the economy. They are not automatic. Real people with flesh and blood must act, and not just once, but continuously, and they must be motivated to take these risks in order for commerce to proceed. And reducing economics to mathematics and graphs ignores the traits of alertness, energy, and enthusiasm so necessary for entrepreneurship, and which traits do not lend themselves to such analysis as graphs and mathematical equations, so they are neglected by mainstream economists. Okay, they say they wait patiently for results. They don't, when you have someone starting a business or bringing a new product or service to market, like say I'm going to build a house. I see there's people that need a house. I'm going to build a house. So I'm going to go buy some wood. I'm going to go buy some concrete. I'm going to go buy some drywall. I'm going to make a house. When am I going to get paid for making that house? Clear at the end when I finally sell it. Okay, but in the meantime, what about the concrete guy? Does he want to get paid? Oh yes, you pay me right now. What about the carpenter that's building the place? Oh yeah, you pay me right now. Okay, these are workers that want their wages, and the entrepreneur's got to be the one that says, I'll take the risk, I'll wait patiently, I have a longer time preference, I'm willing to wait for my reward, where you want to have it right now today. And why? They need it right now today, so they can go home and buy their six-pack so they can relax before they go to bed, right? Or whatever. They have a shorter time preference. And the entrepreneur is the one that has the longer time preference, is willing to wait patiently for those results. And that is how an economy grows and prospers. It's because of these entrepreneurs. They have to organize the resources and manage the whole processes. And there we have entrepreneurs right there in the lemonade stand. Okay, that starts as simple thing as that. Okay, there we are. We finished. I'm only 3 or 4 minutes long. Pat me on the back. Okay, thanks very much for being here. When we come back next time, I'll start out with a little quiz on all the fascinating stuff we just learned.
Did you like it? Yeah.